Karl Marx is widely understood as central to modern sociological thought and one of its founding fathers. While he is most well known for his analysis of capitalism, he also wrote many commentaries on colonialism and was critical of it. As such, then, it may seem a little odd to apply the same criticisms to Marx that we apply to other writers. However, it's precisely for this reason that it's important that the limitations of his approach are properly understood. His dialectics have been a model for a variety of critical approaches in the social sciences. For example, feminists have drawn on his epistemological standpoint of the proletariat to articulate a standpoint of women, and many post-colonial theorists and activists have also been similarly inspired. Yet it should be apparent that his dialectical approach to capitalism also involves a stadial theory of social development, albeit that the stages are called modes of production. For example, modern society is described in terms of the capitalist mode of production, and capitalism itself is understood to emerge in Europe out of feudal social relations, similar to those described by Tocqueville for the Ancien regime in France. Importantly, Marx described capitalism in terms of its exploitative character and the contradictions deriving from the class division embodied in the labour and capital relation. A new post-capitalist society would emerge from within capitalist modernity as a consequence of these contradictions. As with other writers, albeit much more critically, Marx saw colonialism as part of the transition between late feudalism and early capitalism. In his terms, it was part of the primitive accumulation of wealth necessary to bring into being the capitalist investment that would underpin the development and expansion of the capitalist mode of production. The latter, then, had a separate logic of development from which colonialism becomes displaced. Marx has a separate analysis of capitalism's subsequent search for markets through a process of globalization which takes the form of imperialism. However, as the process of global expansion becomes complete, so Marx believed, the internal contradictions of capitalism become increasingly evident and organized around the capital-labor relation at their core. I will unpick these assumptions to suggest a number of things that disrupt Marx's analysis. First, that the capital-labour relation is not so central to capitalist modernity as Marx believed. And second, that capitalism is not so tightly structured or tightly coupled as Marx believed it to be. And third, that colonialism and empire function to provide a patrimony that enables not only wages but also welfare to accrue to whiteness, that is, to populations at capitalism's metropolitan centres. Let's begin with Marx's understanding of the capital-labour relation. As Abraham Harris was the first to argue, Marx sets out the capital-labour relation in terms of a theory of pure capitalism abstracted from historical contingencies which may be various in different locations. The processes represented through this abstraction are nonetheless understood as real processes to which different contingencies will gradually become subsumed. According to pure capitalism, the labourer is formally free but must sell his or her labour power to a capitalist in return for wages. The capitalist puts labour power together with other means of production, raw materials, machines, etc., to produce goods for sale on the market. In effect, then, Marx describes capitalism in terms of a structural contradiction between two markets: the market for labour power and the market for the products of the labour process. In the former, the price of labour power, wages, are driven by competition down towards subsistence. And that's subsistence of the individual worker. In the market for products, the capitalist seeks to find an advantage by investment in new machinery, etc., to increase productivity, but by doing so gains only a temporary advantage as the competitive process is reproduced and ownership becomes more concentrated as some producers go out of business. And as Marx says, with the polarization of the commodity market into these two classes, the fundamental conditions of capitalist production are present. Marx is clear that what he's describing are necessary conditions and consequences of capitalism. Skilled labour becomes reduced to unskilled labour, conventional differences among workers, whether of gender, age or race and ethnicity, are eroded in a process of proletarianisation. On the other side, wealth becomes more concentrated at the same time as the capacity for political intervention to ameliorate circumstances is reduced. The only intervention possible is a transformation of the capital-labour relation itself. Marx's argument is the idea that large-scale capitalist production depends upon formally free labour and the commodification of labour power. This may be an approximation of what was happening in Europe, but it's a very poor description of European colonialism. The problem of poverty that Marx identified within Europe was nonetheless generalized through its colonies and empires. However, there, dispossession of indigenous populations was not accompanied by free labour, but by unfree labour in the form of enslavement and indenture. This included the transportation of labour from Africa and the Indian Ocean world to serve the various colonies. In line with his theory of pure capitalism, Marx predicted the replacement of enslaved labour by free labour, but where slavery was abolished, it was replaced by transported indentured labour, not free labour. Racialized plantation systems, for example, became a global phenomenon well into the 20th century. As Harris argued, it's precisely the variation in forms of labour and the increased differentiation of the division of labour that undermined Marx's predictions of proletarianisation. Wherever there is a system of more and less advantaged forms of employment, there's the possibility of discriminatory access to jobs, whether on the basis of gender or of race and ethnicity. In the case of race and ethnicity, colonialism produces new conventional differences, continuous with the rise of modern society, not as something that is inherited from a pre-modern past. Marx's view of capitalism as a tightly coupled system also extended to the possibilities of political intervention and reform. The only possible reform, according to Marx, was by revolution, something that would follow the process of proletarianisation and struggles to transform capitalism from within. Eventually, the proletariat must come to understand its situation as requiring the overthrow of capitalism to put in place a system oriented to need rather than to profit. Now, Marx's arguments here go back to the 1840s when he was discussing the distressed condition of the Moselle wine growers and how the logic of capitalist political economy required market processes and outcomes to prevail. It was not possible politically to address their poverty. However, by the 1860s, Parliament in Britain, for example, was discussing the implementation of policies explicitly excluded by the doctrines of classical political economy, of which Marx's theory was a part. For example, policies like progressive taxation, the formation of public utilities, and so on. And this was also at the height of European empires and the possibilities they entailed for expanded state budgets and their disbursement on domestic projects. The possibilities of private action, that is charity, and state action were expanded within the bounds of European nations domestically. The patrimony of empires, whether private philanthropic or in the form of colonial taxes, was made available in the metropole, albeit not for the populations subject to taxation and other modes of extraction in the wider empires. Now, Marx's analysis makes room for contingencies in the development of capitalism, but these are always set in the context of becoming subsumed to a process derived from a central, pure theory of capitalism. Moreover, it's a process that privileges a European proletariat as the vanguard of human emancipation. Yet these contingencies seem to be more powerfully structured by a colonialism that binds European populations into the privileged consumption of global resources and a self-ownership of a patrimony appropriated from the territories and labour of others. Thank you.